You know, Gus said, wiping a bit of donut glaze from his formidable mustache, for a guy building a doomsday bunker, you got a real nice lawn. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the steam warm my face in the cool morning air. Gus, for the 10th and hopefully final time, it's not a doomsday bunker. Sure, he chuckled, nudging his partner Sal, who was leaning against a stack of lumber with the stoic patience of a garden gnome. It's what was it again? A personalized atmospheric and meteorological analysis nexus, I recited, the name sounding even more ridiculous out loud than it did in my head. Sal offered a low grunt, which Gus, my self-appointed Salterpreter, immediately translated. He says shed is easier to spell. I couldn't argue with that. From the outside, it was essentially a shed. A very, very robust shed built on a thick concrete slab, with grounding rods sunk 10 feet into the clay soil of my suburban Ohio lot. But inside, it was destined to be my sanctuary, my command center, a place where a man could monitor barometric pressure, track supercell formation, and calculate dew points without being asked to also take out the recycling. I'm an IT professional by trade, a meteorology geek by obsession, and a homeowner in Serenity Meadows Estates by what I was beginning to suspect was a catastrophic lapse in judgment. The project was my magnum opus. Gus and Sal, a duo of contractors who operated on a fuel of caffeine and blue-collar wisdom, were in the 3rd week of construction. They were good guys, if a little prone to creative speculation about my motives. Zombies, Gus declared, pointing a thumb at the reinforced doorframe. That's what this is for. When the dead walk, Alex here ain't gonna be the guy getting his brains eaten in the family room. Smart. It's for the anemometer array and hail plating, Gus. Hail plating, he repeated, winking at me. That what the kids are calling it these days? Honey, lock the doors. There's a Cat 5 hailstorm of zombies coming down the street. Before I could formulate a witty retort about the statistical probability of reanimated corpses versus F3 tornadoes, a new weather pattern emerged at my fence line. This one was far more predictable and infinitely more terrifying. It was Brenda. She stood there, ramrod straight, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a ballistic shield. Her helmet of blonde hair seemed impervious to the morning breeze. Flanking her, straining at their pink leashes, were her 2 miniature poodles. I'd nicknamed them Bylaw and Covenant. Brenda was the president of the Serenity Meadows Homeowners Association, a position she held with the sort of grim, self-aggrandizing importance usually reserved for world leaders and mall cops. She didn't say hello. Brenda didn't believe in conversational foreplay. She went straight for the violation. Mr. Henderson, she announced, her voice carrying across my perfectly manicured lawn with the cutting power of a weed whacker. I'm here to inform you that you are in clear and flagrant violation of the HOA Charter. Article 7, Section 4B. I sighed. Good morning to you too, Brenda. Structures detached, temporary or permanent, she continued, ignoring me, exceeding 6 feet in height or utilizing materials not in harmony with the approved earth tone aesthetic of Serenity Meadows are strictly prohibited. Gus let out a low whistle. She knows the magic words. This wasn't my first rodeo with Brenda. I'd learned to come prepared. I walked over to the patio table and picked up my own binder. A thick, 3-ring behemoth I'd affectionately labeled the War Documents. I flipped to the appropriate tab. Actually, Brenda, I said, holding up a signed form, I have the approved permit from the city right here, and this, I flourished another document, is the written approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee for a garden shed, which you signed yourself on May 12th. I even produced a trio of paint swatches. And, as for the aesthetic, the final siding will be painted a harmonious combination of gentle fawn and mourning dove, both of which are on the pre-approved palette. Check and mate. Or so I thought. Brenda's eyes narrowed, scanning the tangle of conduit and the heavy-duty bolts anchoring the structure to the concrete. She wasn't interested in facts. She was on a crusade against anything that threatened the beige-tinted mediocrity of her domain. "A garden shed doesn't require industrial-grade wiring, Mr. Henderson," she hissed. "I know what you're doing, all those antennas you're planning. You're trying to steal people's Wi-Fi, or worse. I've read the articles online." I was about to ask which articles, the ones written by people who also believe birds are government drones, when Gus decided to help. "He's right, ma'am," Gus said, walking over with a profoundly serious expression. "This here is one of them newfangled 6G towers. Top secret. We're getting paid in crypto straight from the Pentagon. The antennas are for, freedom." Sal, bless his minimalist heart, just slowly shook his head. I shot Gus a look that could melt steel. Brenda's eyes widened. She had just found the missing piece of her conspiracy puzzle. This was bigger than Wi-Fi theft. This was national. "I knew it," she whispered, a strange, triumphant gleam in her eyes. "I will be monitoring this situation, and I will be exploring all available remedies to protect this community." She reeled in bylaw and covenant, spun on her heel, and marched back toward her own identical house, leaving a palpable trail of righteous indignation in her wake. Gus grinned at me. "You're welcome." "Gus," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose, "you just told the most paranoid woman in the Western Hemisphere that I'm building a secret government communications hub in my backyard." "Yeah," he said, taking a triumphant bite of his donut. "Think she'll buy it?" A few days later, I was hauling groceries from my car when a figure detached itself from the shadows of my neighbor's perfectly manicured boxwood hedge. It was Brenda, moving with the stealth of a suburban ninja. "Mr. Henderson." I nearly dropped a gallon of milk. "Brenda, you know, for a guardian of neighborhood tranquility, you're surprisingly terrifying." She was unmoved. She thrust a piece of paper at me. "Official cease and desist," she announced. I took the paper. The first thing I noticed was the font, Comic Sans, size 14. It was a single-page manifesto of madness, a document so profoundly divorced from legal reality that I felt a strange sense of awe. Official HOA cease and desist order to Alex Henderson, 12 Serenity Lane. From Brenda Klein, President, Serenity Meadows HOA. Re. Your unapproved death shed. You are hereby ordered to immediately cease and desist all construction and electronic activities related to the unapproved structure in your rear yard. Said structure is in violation of, but not limited to, the following: unauthorized signal proliferation. Your planned array of antennas constitutes a nuisance and a threat to the electronic serenity of our community. Potential disruption of migratory bird patterns. The electromagnetic fields generated by your machine could disorient the Canadian geese, a cherished local migratory species. Creation of a magnet for negative atmospheric ions. The concentration of so much electricity is creating a documented atmospheric imbalance, leading to general malaise and poodle anxiety throughout the neighborhood. You have 24 hours to begin complete dismantlement of the offending structure. Failure to comply will force me to take matters into my own hands to protect the health, safety, and property values of our residents. I read it twice, just to savor the sheer creative insanity of it all. Negative atmospheric ions, Brenda? Really? Do you have any, and I mean any, scientific data to support that claim? It's common sense, she insisted, her voice rising. All those electronics create a buzz, a negative energy. My poodles have been listless, and I have a headache that only appears when I'm on your side of the street. It's your fault. Brenda, with all due respect, I said, trying to balance my grocery bags, That might be less about my electronics and more about, well, you being on my side of the street. Have you considered correlation versus causation? I have consulted with experts, she shot back. Oh yeah? Who? Bill Nye the Science Guy? A gentleman on YouTube, she said proudly, from a channel called Truth Unzapped. He's a leading researcher in the field of electrosmog, and he says a structure like yours could sterilize a hamster from 50 yards. I stared at her. I had no response to that. There is no combination of words in the English language to adequately address a statement like, sterilize a hamster from 50 yards. 24 hours, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dramatic whisper that she clearly thought was intimidating. The clock is ticking. She vanished back into the hedges. I walked inside, dropped my groceries on the counter, and leaned against the closed door. I crumpled her ridiculous letter and tossed it into the recycling bin. In hindsight, this was a critical error. I had failed to appreciate the lengths to which a person could go when they were armed with a little bit of power and a whole lot of nonsense from the internet. As I later pieced it together, Brenda spent that evening in her beige-on-beige living room, furiously scrolling through an online forum for EMF warriors. It was a digital gathering place for people who believed their dental fillings were receiving radio transmissions and that their neighbors were targeting them with directed energy weapons. And there, in a post between a rant about smart meters and a recipe for an anti-5G smoothie, she found her salvation. It was a link to a sketchy website, the kind full of flashing starburst GIFs and pixelated eagle animations. The site sold a device called the Signal Annihilator Pro 5000. The marketing copy was a thing of beauty. Tired of unwanted signals invading your personal space, annoyed by noisy drones, government surveillance, or your neighbor's loud Wi-Fi? The Signal Annihilator. Pro 5000 creates a 5-mile bubble of pure electronic silence. Using military-grade wave disruption technology, it neutralizes all unwanted signals. It is not a jammer. It is a personal electronic privacy device. Of course, it was a jammer. A highly illegal, wide-spectrum signal jammer, the kind of thing that could get you a lengthy stay in a federal facility. But to Brenda, it was the sword of Excalibur. She was no longer just an HOA president. She was a freedom fighter. She clicked Buy Now. The next afternoon, a suspiciously unmarked van delivered a plain brown box. Inside was a menacing black rectangle of plastic with a thick, screw-on antenna and a single, ominous red button. The instruction manual was a single, laminated sheet. It read, "For making quiet of bad sounds and waves, point at problem, push." The final straw came around 3 p.m. A line of dark, bruised-looking clouds was massing on the western horizon. Gus and Sal were on the roof of my new shed, installing the small, unimposing satellite dish that would link my station to the NOAA Weather Data Network. To me, it was a data dish. To Brenda, watching from her kitchen window, it was an orbital uplink. The final piece of the death ray. She grabbed the Signal Annihilator Pro 5000. She crept into her backyard, using her ceramic bird bath as cover, like a seasoned commando. She aimed the device's thick black antenna squarely at my half-finished shed. "Checkmate, Mr. Henderson," she whispered to her poodles, who were yapping encouragement from the patio door. She pressed the big red button. A small green LED on the box glowed to life. Brenda felt a surge of righteous triumph. She had saved Serenity Meadows. At that exact moment, I was in my home office, 200 feet away. I was tracking the incoming storm on the official National Weather Service radar feed. It was a nasty-looking system, a fast-forming supercell that was showing signs of rotation. On my main monitor, the familiar green and red swirl of the Doppler radar image flickered. It pixelated into a mess of digital static. Then, it vanished completely. It was replaced by 5 simple words in a stark white font: "Signal lost. TDWR offline." I stared at the screen. Huh, that's not good. My first thought was that it was my system. I rebooted my computer. Nothing. I checked my internet connection. It was blazing fast. I pulled up the national feeds from other nearby radar stations. They were all online. It was just ours, the KCVG terminal Doppler weather radar that served the entire metro area, that was gone. Just a gaping, blind hole in the national weather map. I swiveled in my chair and looked at the readouts from my own, still incomplete equipment. The data was streaming in from the sensors Gus and Sal had just finished wiring up. The barometric pressure was falling off a cliff. My instruments were detecting significant wind shear in the upper atmosphere. The storm wasn't just nasty, it had all the telltale signatures of a potential tornado producer. And the one tool that could confirm it, the one system designed to give everyone a warning, was completely, utterly blind. Miles away, in a stark, windowless room filled with glowing screens, that same realization was dawning with the force of a physical blow. The local National Weather Service office was a scene of controlled chaos. Dr. Anya Sharma stood like a statue in the center of the room, her eyes locked on the main display wall, which was now a patchwork of error messages. "Talk to me, Leo," she said, her voice dangerously calm. Her assistant, Leo, a man in his 20s who seemed to be powered by pure, uncut caffeine and anxiety, was a blur of motion. He had a phone pressed to each ear and was typing furiously on a keyboard with his free hand. "It's not just KCVG," he yelped, his voice cracking. "The whole grid is gone. TDWR, NEXRAD, everything within a 20-mile radius of the airport is just static. It's not a hardware failure. The system diagnostics are clean. It's like something is screaming over our frequency." Dr. Sharma's face was grim. She knew what this was. "It's a jammer," she said, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "A powerful one. Someone is actively jamming our radar right before a major tornadic event." Back in my office, I had the same thought. An external source of interference. But who? And why? On a hunch, I fired up the spectrum analysis software connected to my own powerful antenna array. I told the system to scan for anomalous, high-output radio frequency signals. The software chewed on the data for a moment, then spit out a result. A powerful, wide-spectrum electromagnetic field originating from a terrifyingly close source. A heat map appeared on my screen. A pulsing red blotch that seemed to indicate the signal was coming from my own cul-de-sac. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I said to the empty room. I zoomed in. The signal was strongest, the software indicated with pinpoint accuracy, at a location approximately 150 feet from my own GPS coordinates. A location that corresponded perfectly with Brenda Klein's backyard. There was only one thing to do. I looked up the public number for the NWS Severe Weather Hotline. After a dozen rings, a frantic voice answered. "National Weather Service, this is Leo. Please hold." "Don't hold," I said quickly. "My name is Alex Henderson. I think I know what's wrong with your radar." "Sir, we are in the middle of a federal emergency. I don't have time for—" "Look," I cut him off, talking fast. "I'm at 12 Serenity Lane. I'm an amateur meteorologist with a fairly sophisticated home setup. I just ran a spectrum analysis, and I'm tracking a powerful wide-spectrum jamming signal originating from my immediate vicinity. And by immediate vicinity, I mean it's likely coming from my neighbor's ceramic bird bath." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Sir," Leo said slowly, "this is a federal emergency line, not a prank call service. Making false reports is a serious crime." "I'm not making a false report," I insisted. "Check your own telemetry. Triangulate the jamming source. I bet you it points right to a residential area about 15 miles northwest of your office. I'm telling you, it's my HOA president. She thinks my garden shed is a government death ray, and I think she just bought something illegal on the internet to fight back." I heard a muffled voice in the background. Then a new, sharper voice came on the line. "This is Dr. Sharma. Who is this?" She grilled me. She threw a dozen technical questions at me about signal propagation, frequency bands, and atmospheric ducting. I answered every one. There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear the gears turning. "You're not a crank," she finally said, a note of disbelief in her voice. "You're actually seeing this." "I'm seeing the data, yes, and I'm seeing my neighbor peeking at me through her blinds. Stay where you are, Mr. Henderson. We're coming to you." The line went dead. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. My quiet Tuesday was officially over. Before the black government SUVs could arrive, the local constabulary made an appearance. A familiar police cruiser rolled into my cul-de-sac with the unhurried grace of a tired whale. Officer Miller emerged from the driver's side. Miller was a 25-year veteran of the force, a man whose primary facial expression was one of profound, unshakable weariness. He looked like he'd seen everything humanity had to offer and had been disappointed by all of it. His partner, Officer Davis, was the polar opposite. He practically bounded out of the passenger seat, young, eager, and with a ramrod-straight posture that screamed, "I just graduated from the academy and I know all the rules." Miller consulted his little notepad. "Afternoon, Alex," he said with a sigh. "We got a couple of weird calls. One was an anonymous tip about a disturbance. And unauthorized broadcasting. Another came down from the state police, something from the FAA about massive signal interference near the airport. Both seem to be pointing right here. You know anything about that?" I took a deep breath. "Officer," I began, choosing my words carefully, "I believe my neighbor, Brenda Klein, is unintentionally committing several federal felonies with a device she likely purchased from a website that also sells copper pyramids that align your chakras." Davis puffed up his chest. "Sir, are you alleging your neighbor is a terrorist?" "I'm alleging she's an idiot, officer," I replied. "The two are becoming increasingly indistinguishable in modern society." At that moment, Gus and Sal, who had been supervising the situation from my driveway, ambled over. Gus, ever the helpful one, clapped a hand on Davis's shoulder. "He's right, kid," Gus said sagely. "The lady next door is wound tighter than a $2 watch. Thinks this here shed is gonna cause the next plague or something. I told her it was for talking to space aliens. Probably didn't help." Sal nodded once, a gesture of profound agreement. Just then, as if summoned by the mention of her name, Brenda herself appeared. She must have seen the police car in front of my house and assumed her complaint about my death shed had finally borne fruit. She marched across her lawn, clipboard in hand, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she proclaimed, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This man has been terrorizing our neighborhood with his illegal satellite and radio waves." Miller looked from my face to Brenda's, then back to my half-built shed. His expression didn't change, but I could see a decade's worth of retirement fantasies flashing behind his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat as a month-old soda. "What kind of satellite are we talking about?" "The kind with microwaves," she declared, pointing a trembling finger at the small data dish on the roof. Before Miller could process this new and exciting piece of information, two black Chevrolet Tahoes with government plates came screaming into the cul-de-sac. They didn't use sirens, but their flashing red and blue grille lights cut through the darkening afternoon gloom. They screeched to a halt behind Miller's cruiser. The doors flew open, and Dr. Sharma emerged from the lead vehicle, followed closely by a pale and frantic-looking Leo. Dr. Sharma completely ignored the local police and Brenda. Her eyes scanned the scene and locked onto me. She held a strange pistol-gripped device in her hand, a spectrum analyzer. "Henderson?" she barked. "Sharma, NWS, show me." This was it. The moment where my weird hobby and my neighbor's weird paranoia were about to have a very public, very messy collision. I pointed a shaky finger across the lawn. "The signal is strongest over there," I said, "right behind the ceramic flamingo next to her bird bath." Dr. Sharma aimed her device. It immediately let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek, like a robot being murdered. The needle on its display pegged into the red. "That's it," she said, her voice a low, angry growl. "That's our interference, unlicensed, wide-spectrum, and powerful enough to blind an international airport." Every head turned. Officer Miller's weary gaze, Officer Davis's utterly bewildered stare, Gus and Sal's curious eyes, Dr. Sharma's icy glare. All of them landed squarely on Brenda. Her triumphant expression began to crumble, replaced by a dawning look of horror. It's a personal privacy device," she stammered, holding up her hands. "It's for my own protection." Dr. Sharma turned to Officer Miller, her patience clearly gone. "Officer, that privacy device has just blinded our regional Doppler radar during a severe tornado warning. That is a violation of the Communications Act of 1934, not to mention a dozen other federal statutes. We need that device deactivated, now." The weight of the word federal seemed to finally penetrate Officer Miller's armor of apathy. He let out the deepest, most profound sigh I had ever heard, and walked slowly over to Brenda's immaculately edged lawn. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the weight of all the stupid things he'd ever been asked to do, "I'm going to need you to go over there and turn off your birdbath jammer." Brenda, now fully cornered, did what all cornered, irrational people do. She doubled down. "I will not," she shrieked. "I have a right to protect myself from his mind rays." While Miller was trying to reason with her, Leo, the frantic NWS assistant, was having a whispered, high-speed conversation with Dr. Sharma. He kept pointing at the sky, then at my yard. "The jammer's location. It's created a total dead zone for the ground radar," Leo said, talking a mile a minute. "But if we could get real-time atmospheric data from directly above the dead zone, if we could launch a supplementary radio sonde, a balloon, we could get the vertical profile of the storm. We could see the rotation." Dr. Sharma's eyes, which had been filled with fury, suddenly lit up with scientific inspiration. She scanned the area, her mind working. She needed a launch site, an open space, clear of trees and power lines, with cooperative landowners. Her gaze swept past Brenda's yard, over the street, and landed directly on my property. My wide, freshly mowed lawn, my sturdy, half-built weather station, my prize-winning azaleas. She strode back over to me, completely ignoring the escalating argument between Officer Miller and Brenda. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her tone all business, "you have a well-maintained property with a significant clearing and a southern exposure. I need to requisition your backyard for an emergency weather balloon launch. Immediately." I stared at her. Then I looked at my lawn. Then I looked at Brenda, who was now accusing Officer Miller of being part of the deep state. Gus and Sal had somehow produced a bag of pork rinds and were watching the scene unfold like it was a movie. "You want to what?" I asked, the words barely coming out. "Sure," I heard myself say. "Why not? It's not like my Tuesday could get any weirder." Famous last words. The moment I gave my consent, my backyard ceased to be a quiet suburban oasis and instantly became the mission control for Operation Backyard. The back doors of the NWS Tahoe swung open to reveal a scene straight out of a science fiction movie. Packed inside was a massive, folded white canvas, a collection of helium tanks that looked like miniature bombs, and a complex, boxy instrument package covered in antennas and sensors. The radiosonde. Leo, who had previously been a bundle of pure anxiety, transformed into a field marshal. He started barking orders, uncoiling tethers and checking wind speeds on a handheld device. "Okay, people, this is a time-sensitive launch," he shouted. "The storm cell is intensifying. We need to anchor the primary tether here. Watch the K-index for ionospheric scintillation. Gus, is it? Can you secure this helium regulator? It's a bit tricky, so be careful." Gus, who had never backed down from a challenge in his life, grabbed the regulator. "Got it, Sonny," he said with a grin. "Just like hooking up the gas on the old baby Q." "Hey, Sal," he called to his partner. "This kid's more wound up than a cuckoo clock in an earthquake." Sal, who was now holding a heavy anchor point, gave a single, profound grunt of agreement. To my utter astonishment, Gus and Sal were instantly, seamlessly integrated into the NWS launch team. They were naturals. Meanwhile, Officers Miller and Davis were relegated to crowd control. Their crowd consisted entirely of Brenda, who was vibrating with rage on the other side of my fence, and a growing number of curious neighbors who were emerging from their houses, drawn by the sight of 2 government SUVs and a police car parked in our sleepy cul-de-sac. Officer Davis, bless his by-the-book heart, was trying to make sense of it all for his report. He kept clicking his pen, looking from my yard to Brenda's. "So," he muttered to his partner, "the perpetrator is victim 2, who is also the source of the federal crime. But victim 1's yard is now the secondary crime scene? And the federal agency is launching an unpermitted aerial vehicle from said scene? How do I even write this up?" Officer Miller put a calming hand on his shoulder. "Kid, put the pen down," he advised. "Just watch the show. You'll never ever see anything like this again in your entire career." Then, the inflation began. Leo and Gus attached the nozzle from the helium tank, and with a loud hiss, the great white beast began to stir. The thin, high-performance fabric billowed and swelled, growing from a pile of canvas into a small hill, then into a dome, and then into a massive, shimmering orb that towered over my fence. It was surreal, a giant white bubble of science rising up against the backdrop of identical beige houses and perfectly manicured lawns. I just stood there, on my own patio, coffee cup still in hand, watching a federal weather emergency operation unfold next to my rose bushes. My internal monologue was running wild. I should have just built a gazebo. Brenda would have approved of a gazebo. It would have harmonized with the earth tone aesthetic. The sight of the giant balloon, which was now straining against its tethers and eclipsing the roof of my house, seemed to be the final catalyst that pushed Brenda over the edge of reason and into the abyss of pure, unadulterated madness. Having been finally forced by Officer Miller to surrender her Signal Annihilator Pro 5000, which now sat forlornly in a large evidence bag on the hood of his cruiser, she was witnessing her ultimate nightmare. Her nemesis hadn't just won. He'd somehow conscripted the full force of the U.S. government to throw a party in his backyard. She grabbed her fence posts, her knuckles white. She was convinced this wasn't a weather balloon. It was a spy balloon, a weather weapon, a giant, floating vessel of everything she feared. "Do you see?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with a potent mix of fury and terror. Her audience was the growing assembly of neighbors who were now lining the sidewalk, filming with their phones. "I told you, he's a government agent. They're launching chemtrail dispensers from his yard. It's all connected. Wake up, sheeple!" The neighbors' reactions were a beautiful suburban tapestry of confusion, amusement, and mild annoyance. Mr. Henderson from down the street, an avid golfer, was concerned it might drift over the local country club. Mrs. Gable, a sweet old lady, shuffled over to my fence. "Alex, dear," she whispered, "do you think that big balloon will scare the squirrels away from my bird feeder? They've been so aggressive lately." "I can only hope, Mrs. Gable," I said. "I can only hope." Officer Miller, however, was in his element. He was handling Brenda with the practiced, calming ease of a bomb disposal expert diffusing a very loud, very irrational explosive device. He just stood there, letting her rant, nodding occasionally. "That thing is going to spray us all with mind control gas?" Brenda screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the balloon. "Yes, ma'am," Miller said in a low, soothing voice. "That's why we're here. Standard procedure for a potential mind control gas situation. The key is to establish a perimeter. We've got it under control. You just stay right there on your side of the fence. That's the designated safe zone." Davis was watching his partner, his mouth slightly agape, as if he were witnessing a Jedi mind trick in person. The sky had turned a deep, bruised purple. The wind was whipping through the trees, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Leo held up his hand, checking the data on his tablet one last time. "The updraft is perfect. Launch window is now," he yelled over the wind. "Release!" Gus and Sal, their faces masks of solemn importance, stood at the two main anchor points. With a shared nod, they unclipped the primary tethers. And it was free. The massive Doppler balloon, with the complex little box of science dangling 100 feet beneath it, rose from my backyard with a silent, majestic grace. It cleared my rooftop. It cleared the tallest oak trees. It ascended into the churning, ominous clouds, a pale white sphere against a dark, angry sky. For one long moment, the entire cul-de-sac fell silent. Everyone, me, the cops, the NWS crew, the bewildered neighbors, even Brenda, just stood there, heads tilted back, watching it go. The silence was finally perfectly broken by Sal. He looked up at the spot where the balloon had vanished into the clouds, then looked over at Gus. "Huh," he said. An hour later, the storm had hit and was already moving on. It had been a violent squall, with hammering rain, and a brief, terrifying howl of wind that had sent everyone scrambling. But thanks to the data from my backyard balloon, the NWS had issued a targeted tornado warning a full 12 minutes before the rotation passed directly over the county line, giving people in its path a crucial head start. The worst had been avoided. The NWS crew was packing up their gear. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle. The black Tahoes were humming quietly by the curb. Dr. Sharma walked over to me, a rare, small smile on her face. Her phone had just rung. "The data was perfect," she said, tucking the phone away. "The vertical profile was exactly what we needed to confirm the hook echo. Mr. Henderson, your backyard and your quick thinking may have just saved lives tonight. Glad my lawn could be of service." I shrugged. It felt like the only appropriate response. Gus clapped me on the back, nearly sending me into the mud. "See? Told you it was a doomsday bunker. Paid off already." The final act of the drama was playing out across the street. Officer Miller, looking more tired than ever, was handing a sheaf of official-looking papers to a pale, rain-soaked Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "this is a citation from our department for creating a public nuisance. This is a formal summons for questioning from the Federal Communications Commission regarding the illegal use of a signal jamming device. And this last one is from the Federal Aviation Administration. I'd advise you to hire a lawyer. A very good one." Brenda didn't shriek or protest. She just stood there, speechless, the papers growing limp in her hand. Her reign of HOA terror, built on a foundation of suspicion and pseudoscience, had been brought down by a balloon. The other neighbors, sensing a shift in the political winds of the cul-de-sac, slowly began to back away from her, melting back into their own homes. Dr. Sharma shook my hand firmly. "We owe you one, Mr. Henderson. I'll see to it you get an official NWS commendation. She handed me a navy blue baseball cap with the agency's logo on it, and a hat. Leo shook my hand with the frantic energy of a hummingbird. All the data from the radio sonde, it's incredible. I'll email you the raw files. We got readings from inside the mesocyclone. It's beautiful. As the NWS and police cars finally pulled away, leaving streaks of wet tire tracks on the asphalt, I was left standing on my driveway with Gus and Sal. The street was blessedly quiet again, save for the gentle drumming of the rain. Gus pulled a folded, slightly damp piece of paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to me. It was their invoice. It included their standard hours for labor and materials, plus 2 new line items at the bottom. Hazard pay, proximity to federal incident, $200. Specialist consultation. Deputy NWS launch crew, $300. I looked at it, then at Gus's hopeful face. Seems fair, I said with a nod. He grinned. So, we finishing this thing up tomorrow? I looked at my slightly trampled lawn, at the empty space where the balloon had been, and at my magnificent, half-finished nexus. Yeah, Gus, I said, we're finishing it, but I'm making some upgrades. I want lightning rods, big ones, the biggest ones you can find. Sal, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, offered a rare, 2-syllable grunt of what sounded like profound approval. Later that night, the storm had long passed, leaving behind the clean, fresh smell of rain-soaked earth. I sat in my office, the NWS cap on my desk, sipping a well-deserved beer. On my screen wasn't a radar feed, but the data Leo had sent me, a beautiful, intricate graph showing temperature, humidity, and wind speed at every altitude as the balloon rose through the heart of the storm. My email pinged. I clicked over. The subject line read, "An urgent message from the Serenity Meadows HOA board." It was from the remaining members of the board. It was a long, rambling, and deeply formal apology for the unfortunate events of the day. They informed me that Brenda had tendered her immediate resignation as president. And then came the final paragraph. In light of your demonstrated expertise in atmospheric phenomena and your clear-headed handling of a crisis situation, the board would like to formally nominate you to fill the vacant position of HOA president. I stared at the email, at the words president, nominate, and you. Then I started to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a deep, unrestrained roar that filled the quiet house. I laughed until my sides hurt, and tears streamed down my face. Wiping my eyes, I minimized the email. I opened a new browser tab and typed in a search query. Professional-grade lightning rod arrays. A wide grin spread across my face. Okay, I said to myself, the possibilities blooming in my mind. Okay, let's get to work.